Hey crafty people, today we're making a fun interactive card using the Doves in Flight Altenew layering die set. It's from the February release and I just love the doves you can create with it because they look super realistic. The set also includes sentiment dies, so you can create full cards with it. The layering dies are designed after the keyhole principle, which makes them super easy to assemble. Basically, each die also cuts out a keyhole, and if all keyholes align when you have assembled your image, you've done everything right. I have already prepared some scrap pieces of different colored cardstock to use to cut out all the pieces. Now I'm just trying to fit all the dies on my scrap papers. For this card I'm using the smaller of the two doves. And I'm not sure if you can see this on camera, but each die also embosses a number, so you know which way you have to layer all the pieces, which I think is just super convenient. And now I'm just gonna roll this through my die cutting machine. I'm back, everything is cut out, and now I'm gonna put the dove together. I have one piece that I cut out in a lighter shade of grey, because I think that makes my dove look even more realistic. And as you can see, both pieces have the keyholes, and if I align them properly, both pieces are in their right place. So now I know where it belongs. I'm just putting a little bit of glue on the back side, and then just stick it to my first piece, and again making sure that the keyholes align. Once they do, I press everything down firmly to make sure it stays that way. So this is what the first two layers look together, and now I just repeat that process with all the other pieces. As I said, they all have tiny embossed numbers on them, so I don't have to worry about which comes next. And as you can see, you can always look through the keyhole. Now come the colored pieces for the beak and the feet, and the second last piece is the eye, which I think is too tiny to really see on camera. Now the dove is almost finished, you can still see the keyhole, and there's one piece in the set to just cover up all the keyholes. Next I have prepared my DIN A6 card cover, and I took another piece of scrap paper, and I will now cut a cloudy border into it. If you have a cloud stencil you can use that, but I don't have one, so I have to do it this way. It's probably not as neat or pretty as a real stencil, but I just have to work with it. So now I have my makeshift stencil, and I'm just gonna put it at the top of my card cover. Next I use the new Altenew Shades of Purple Fresh Dye ink set to transfer the cloud border onto my card cover, starting with the lightest shade of purple, which is soft lilac. I actually don't do a lot of ink blending, so please be lenient with me. I'm using a tiny finger sponge for this because I don't have a big one, but I think the small one works just as well. And you're all probably just way more experienced in this than I am. But for those of you who have never done this before, you basically just hold down your stencil and then go over it very lightly with your brush or sponge to distribute the ink on the surface behind the stencil. For the next row, I'm dragging down my stencil a bit and shift it a little to the right to alternate the shapes of the clouds. And I'm also using soft lilac for this row, but the further I get down, the darker shade of purple I will use. So for this purpose, these gradient ink sets are just perfect. I'm just gonna repeat this process for all the next rows, so I will speed this up a little to save you some time. Now my background is finished and I don't have to worry about this bottom part because I will cover it with this piece. But before I do that, I want to give it a cloud border too. So I took out my scissors again and I'm just doing the same thing I did before, which is just cutting kind of bubbly shapes along the edge. Now I have my cloud border, but I still want my cover piece to look like my background. So I placed my makeshift stencil on top of this cover piece and repeated the inking process from before. But this time I'm starting with a darker shade of purple, deep iris to be precise. This way I'll still have a continuous gradient once I put this cover piece on my background. Now that both pieces have the same background, I can continue with the mechanism. For that I'm using my set square to find and mark the center of my card cover. And then I'm drawing two more lines, slightly right and slightly left to the center. This way I'm marking a very slim slot for my mechanism that I will cut out in the next step. And again, I'm sure there are dies for this, but I don't have them, so I just have to do it by hand. So I'm just taking my nearest craft knife and cut along the marks I have just drawn. Now I can remove the piece between the cut lines and the base for my mechanism is finished. Now I just need a pull strip that's longer than my slot. But before I put it in place, I want to cut out a tiny notch from my card cover, so it will be easier later to pull out the strip. And I want to make sure that the notch that I cut out is slightly wider than my pull strip. Now that that's done, I can place my pull strip behind the slot I cut out before. And I also want to make sure that it is straight, so parallel to the edges of the card cover. To adhere the dove to the pull strip, I'm using the 1/4 instant dimension foam tape from Altenew, and I'm just using a teeny tiny piece of it, cause it has to fit within the borders of the slot, and I'm sticking it through the bottom of the slot to the pull strip behind it. Then I take my dove and stick it to the other side of the double-sided tape. I press it down firmly to make sure it really sticks to that tiny piece of foam tape. Next, I'm taking out the tape roll again, because now I want to cover the area around the dove. And with around, I mean just below the dove, because otherwise it won't be able to move. So now I'm just filling up all the empty spaces below the dove with the foam tape. Once all the foam tape covers are removed, I can stick down my cloudy cover piece, which should cover up the dove perfectly. Now I'm just turning the card cover around to place some more foam tape on the back of it. And this time I'm using the 1" wide foam tape. And I really love using foam tape for these kinds of projects because it allows the mechanism to move freely and easily. This time I just used 2 strips of foam tape that are just as long as my card cover. The foam tape also keeps my pull strip in place. I only leave a tiny bit of space between the tape and the pull strip to give it a little bit of wiggle room. Now I just have to prepare my card base, pull off the foam tape covers, and stick the cover to my card front. The cover is slightly smaller than my card, so I'm trying to center it as much as possible so it has an even frame around it. For a final touch, I'm also rounding the corners of my pull strip. I just love rounded corners. I think they give each project just a nice finished look. Now for the sentiment of my card, I'm going back to the Doves in Flight die set, and I decided to use Sending Love as my sentiment. And each sentiment die comes with a slightly larger die for the surrounding area of the sentiment, so you can really make your sentiment pop. I decided on a dark purple for the surrounding area and a plain white for the sentiment itself. And now the card is almost finished, but I still want to add one tiny additional detail. Since the sentiment says Sending Love, I want the dove to hold a tiny love letter in its claws. So I just drew a letter on a tiny cardstock rectangle and also added a tiny heart to close it. Now I'm just adding a little glue to the top so I can stick the letter to the back of the dove's claws. I press everything down firmly so everything stays where it's supposed to be, and also write a tiny pull note at the top of my pull strip so that the recipient will know what to do with it. And now when you pull the pull strip, the dove appears with a little love note. Isn't that cute? And yeah, that's my finished card. I really hope you like it, and if you do, please leave a like on the video or subscribe to my channel. And all that's left to say is happy crafting!